Isn't that interesting? Yes, ma'am.
Interestingly enough, the Department of Transportation does not actually, when they do the analysis of the amount of they call them crashes, they don't actually call them accidents, because they believe that a majority of those are preventable, and it's due
So it's not
to
an
distracted
accident.
driving. So they don't even call them
Call them an
accidents,
accident.
they're crashes.
Yeah, thank you.
So-
It's like in aviation, they don't call them accidents, they're mishaps.
Mishaps.
Yeah, smartly chosen words, exactly. Yes, sir.
So earlier this year, a book came out which was fascinating. You probably read it. It's called Autonomy, and it's written by Lawrence Burns. And Lawrence Burns was the head of R&D for General Motors.
Yeah.
And so he talks about his search for autonomy within the big car companies. And then when General Motors started partnering with Google, he started bouncing back and forth between the two cultures. So and then eventually he switches to Google's side. And you get this story that shows both sides of this, I don't know, this evolving problem about who's going to run this area. It's really a great book.
Good point for conversation, sort of the macro level. Google, Uber, the non-traditional auto companies were the ones that were leading the charge. For Intel is another one, leading the charge for the development of autonomous vehicles. It wasn't Ford, it wasn't GM, it wasn't Mercedes, it wasn't Chrysler. And those big companies, the big auto manufacturer companies 5 years ago, were looking at autonomous vehicles as sort of a pie in the sky. That's just not going to happen. But Google was making great progress, oh, by the way. And in 2014, for example, Google had 2,200 employees focused on developing an autonomous vehicle, 2,200. The next closest competitor to Google in 2014, Intel, had 200. The amount of money that Google was spending in 2014, undisclosed, but you can be sure it was in the millions. And so now Ford and Chrysler and others started seeing the progress made, and how Google and Uber see this, it's the vehicle's just a vehicle. Remember I was talking about unmanned systems? That's just a vehicle, you know, it's part of a larger system. So how do you sensorize, you know, sort of pimp my vehicle, just buy an off-the-shelf vehicle and make it fully autonomous? And that's where these other big movers are moving. And that's where Google and Chrysler, I'm not Google, but Chrysler and Ford, this ends up being the pairing. Oh, we're going to be displaced. We're just going to be making vehicles, and it's going to be somebody else that accessorizes them and provides them to the public. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so a question, I hear Ford is going out of the car business in the next few years. Do you know whether this whole autonomous vehicle has affected their decision? I was shocked to hear that they were going out of
It's part of that business dynamic. So how much is forcing Ford out of the car business, or whether they're really going to go out of the car business, is yet to be seen, but it's the dynamic environment. So as we talk about this dynamic environment, I mentioned to you before, Uber, largest taxi company in the world. 2014, Uber made their first big move in the United States. They've gone international. They were, you know, selling Uber rides internationally, a little bit in the U.S., but they really doubled down in the U.S. in 2014. And so Uber, here, they don't even own any cars, but they're the largest taxi company in the world. And then you have Lyft is following them now. But they have all the revenue coming in. They have visions and dreams of how they can make this disrupt this industry to include autonomous vehicles. And that's kind of the power, you know, that's behind this is moving forward. We are all along for this ride, this tipping point of the revolution in transportation. I do believe, in my heart of hearts, that we will see more autonomous trucks on the road to reduce the mishaps. What do they call them? Incidents.
Crashes.
Crashes.
Exactly. Sir.
Actually, the subject that you are talking about, transportation, and both actually those systems are unsafe and they are very risky. Having drones transfer people and goods in the air will not happen, in my view.
Mm-hmm.
It will never happen, and nobody will approve it. The goal is really not to use transportation and to avoid using transportation by having really a future city with all the food that we need grown in the city and all the jobs are generated within the city. So at that time, people do not need transportation, and this is what the future will look like, hopefully.
Good point. I agree with you, but I think it's going to be a hybrid of reducing the requirement for transportation, but at the same time, there's going to be greater and more autonomy.
There is no reason that we bring goods from California, for instance. Why we don't grow our food here in Florida? So this is the idea, is to get rid of transportation, not to have risky systems. One of the goals really in systems engineering is safety. If the system is not safe, just we will never touch
Very
it.
good point. So we've all experienced blue screens with our computers, you have that technology anomaly. And certainly if you're in an urban air mobility vehicle and it had a blue screen, as you're a passenger, not good. Yeah. And even in your autonomous vehicle. What the autonomous vehicles do now for the ground vehicles, if they fail gracefully. They'll realize they're having an event, they'll just pull over the side of the road and just stop. Beep, I thought it was interesting for the certification for beep safety use in Lake Nona was to get the crash and rescue, the fire response, first responders down to do demonstrations of how do the first responders respond to a vehicle that doesn't have a steering wheel, it doesn't have any pedals. What do you do if you have an emergency? And so they brought them down, and actually it's almost like a game stick. You have a little USB port, and you can kind of move it around and get it off the road. It's battery operated.
I have one thing real quick. So they're already doing, they were here 3 weeks ago. It's called Teslas.com.
Yeah.
And you can register right now and get a
Yeah,
autonomous
the future,
vehicle from San Diego.
the
to
concept
LA
of
right
future
now.
city is very old. Actually, IEEE, they have the future city contest, whatever it's called, every year. And
Yeah.
people propose,
Yep.
this is really, if you go to the IEEE website and look at future cities, the goal is really to get rid of transportation or to reduce the dependence of
I'm
transportation.
just trying to
as
save you
much
money
as-
because they're offering these rides free now from San Diego to LA. You can go online right now on the
Yeah.
internet and sign up.
Yeah.
But there's a company just 2 blocks away called Luminar. How many people know Luminar? Okay, they are the ones developing the photonics and the sensors.
Yeah.
And we were in the car yesterday, Captain Hill from Natchez, the commander, and I, at 10:30, we're driving down Research Park in their car, and he's showing us the system compared to what's going on in Lake Nona.
I
And
mean,
it's like 1,000 times.
Just imagine you have 1 million drone in the air, and how many accidents you will get, God knows.
Here's it. Please, go ahead.
Sorry. So my biggest challenge as a systems engineer with these autonomous vehicles and really connected, automated, and autonomous is that a lot of the programs that are funded by the federal government, they require us to follow this V-model systems engineering. V-model is very systemic, it's very prescriptive, you know the outcome, and so you have this very, prescriptive kind of process for implementing a system. But there is really no process that's going to help with verification and validation of a system that has undeterministic behaviors, and it changes the outcome based on the inputs that are fed to it. So, so the main challenge right now is autonomous vehicles are coming, but I would also say that, I'm kind of going off on a tangent, I would also say that technology is not really ready because LiDAR under certain weather conditions can't detect. And so then what are you left with? Maybe Elon Musk's recommendations of sensors and computations, and so there's really the technology is not totally here yet. And we're still battling over the spectrum at the national level. So for the Federal Communications Administrations,
Yeah, this is good.
you
Yeah,
know,
very
we
good.
have this
Very good.
this very high frequency spectrum that we can communicate through, but now there's battles over the utilization of that spectrum. And then we have this concept of this security credential management system for securing what vehicles are allowed to communicate within this connected environment, but then the hardware is incompatible, like you said, even from one county to another. You know, if you get a Siemens roadside equipment versus a 3M, the connected vehicle applications could be deployed inside the roadside unit, which doesn't make sense because those things are a commodity. You replace them every few years.
I love it.
Versus having, like a Raspberry Pi, something. So then here I am trying to design a system. It's like, well, so I've created like 2 different hybrid, processes that includes, because then there's this consulting element where we are the general engineering consultant to the Department of Transportation, to FTE. I work with HMTV, that by the way. So we're helping you guys with SunTrax.
This is where I'm absolutely delighted to be here with systems engineers, because even though I'm not a systems engineer, again, aerospace, aeronautical, you know, through my career I've been a systems engineer. In this environment, as I look at you as systems engineer in a profession, congratulations and condolences. Congratulations, because truly, systems engineering is needed more than ever before. Condolences for exactly what you're discussing. It is so dynamic and so complicated. And when I make the comment about, you know, who's going to get in these vehicles, I would imagine of any professional group, the systems engineers would probably be the last ones to get in an autonomous vehicle, because you know that there's challenges. As opposed to somebody that had a degree in forestry. I'm sorry if there's any forestry professionals that go, sure, I'll ride one of those things. But in any case, it's really challenging. Another industry that's significantly impacted, last year I believe it was, I was invited to be part of a group in Georgetown University, and it was about autonomous vehicles moving forward in transportation. And part of that, I was a keynote, but then also I chaired a panel, and the panel was made of insurance industry executives. What does the insurance industry do? What happens if you go from one accident in 60,000 miles to one accident in 6 million miles? Insurance premium would go down? Oh man, the bottom falls out of it. So the insurance companies, they're looking at this with anxiety. And again, we still have some way to go, but the way to go apparently isn't as far as we thought it was 5 years ago. The future may be coming quicker than we can imagine. And therefore, you know, the insurance company, and it may be that you have like a Super Cruise in your car that's in autonomous mode, and then if you really enjoy driving, you drive, and your vehicle has its own internet protocol, for example, IP, and as soon as the insurance company, you know, it knows automatically, you go to Super Cruise, it's autonomous, and your accident rate drops, you know, to 1 in 6 million miles, and your insurance rate goes from, you know, where it is when you're driving to now it's autonomous, and it just falls right out. So you pay by the hour, for example.
And what they're thinking is that with human drivers, there's more frequent, but the, I guess the impact to what an insurance has to pay out is smaller than what they're predicting autonomous. It's going to be a bigger.
It's like a class action
more,
suit.
yeah, it's going to be.
One big.
So it's going to, at the end
it's
of the
going
day,
to be a Morgan
they think
Morgan
it's
type
going
of
to,
thing.
it's going to balance itself out. So
I'm sure we'll pay
fewer,
the
but
same
more, yeah. Oh,
Guaranteed.
oh, I'm sure.
Commonality, like you had to do with unmanned systems, it's gonna be the same thing. That's your big issue. And everybody's for commonality, but they want their commonality, they want their protocol,
Right.
like you said. And
And one
that's where
thing
you're gonna-
Peg brings up too, that's related in this air, ground, maritime, they're all first cousins. Sort of the technology, the sensors, the software being used in the different domains, they're really the first cousins. And so it's a really sharing of capability. And as more laws continues to progress, the sensors become even more capable, more affordable. It's going to continue to accelerate, and as we're realizing that what used to be technologically unachievable, we're demonstrating now that the technology can be achieved. And we're realizing that really the inhibitors are culture, policy, politics, it's governance. It's those things that are sort of getting in the way right now.
Yeah,
Yes, sir.
It certainly is, boils down to sharing of technologies, and I think you absolutely have to have your emphasis with transportation. And all of these interactive systems need to communicate. So the transportation of data and the interaction of all of these things that you've talked about
Yeah.
require a good and reliable transportation of data, communications. If not, they're not going to work.
Yeah. We're
And
still
if
like-
the wrong data is transmitted, that's bad, real bad. Right?
really bad.
Really bad. And we haven't even talked about security, confidentiality, integrity, and the availability of just data, or even there's sensors that don't even have the capability to have security at all. It doesn't log, it doesn't connect to anything, but the data from it is being uploaded to a system that, and So,
You're right, you're right.
No, so what I think is, look at the complexity, there's massive complexity in all of this sort of stuff, right? And like, just imagine, you know, not too far in the future, because we're getting very close there, right? It's rush hour, you're on a highway, you're doing 60, 70 miles an hour. A third of the cars have no drivers, a third of the cars have radar assisted braking and cruise control, and a third of the cars, people are driving themselves because that's what they want to do. And you come around a bend and there's a brush fire on both sides of the road, right? And all three of those systems are going to react to that fire in a very different way, right? So you're going to, and again, bumper to bumper, 70 miles an hour, you know, what are those interactions? How are those going to unfold, right?
Would you rather have a driver that just got divorced and is having all kinds of stress problems in the life, or a computer system that is processing
What I'm-
100 billion data points a second?
What I'm saying is that there will be this transition when there will be mixtures of these types of, like each will have their features, and each will have their weaknesses, and each will have their strengths, right? And each will have their reaction and their times and all that kind of stuff. Some will change lanes, some won't change lanes. It's going to be a very interesting experiment in complexity,
We're gonna
right?
have that for years.
Exactly. So, I mean, I like all the stuff talk about the autonomy, and there's a lot to learn, and I really love where we're going. But when you look at the complexity from a systems perspective, it's this massive complexity of the interaction of these different cultures, to use a word that you use several times there, right?
Exactly.
That is going to be with us for, you know, consider when the automobile started, right? There was a conference in the 1896, I can't remember what city it was in, but all the mayors of all the major cities around the world all got together because they had a massive problem. And that problem was the cities, for lack of a better phrase, were filling up with horse shit.
Yeah.
You know, there was tons and tons and tons of the cities where they stank and they had all these things. They abandoned the conference because they didn't know what to do about it. Fast forward 10 years, and some guy named Henry Ford said, I can put cars on the road for about $500 a copy, and you can get rid of your damn horses, right? And so the fact that it was spewing out all this smoke and oil and things, like, this is a lot better than that, right? So, but then there was this interaction of horses and cars, and the internet, and the change to pollution, everything like that. All of these side effects, right, are all part of this system, right? And that systems engineering, we need to look at these unintended consequences, right, and these interactions and these complexities, right? That's all part of it.
Woven through here, and I think it's a good example, is arguably one of the leaders, if not the leader, Waymo, Google, and their 10 billion simulated miles of last year compared to the 5 million miles of all the auto companies, a combined road time. And I would assert, not that I have any insight in Google, but their 10 billion of simulated miles, they're doing the tumbleweeds, you know, going across the fires, you know, trying to go through all the scenarios. And I think very much to the comment, Google would like to be, they would like to be the common system, the open system for everybody. And so, you know, when we talk about standards, you know, I want my company, or I want my operating system to be the standard for everybody. So this is where the hundreds of millions, the billions of dollars are being pumped into these autonomous vehicles. Who's going to be to the finish line first, and who's going to get the grand award, the big brass ring? But there's still a long ways to go. You know, my assertion is, I'm probably getting to the end here, and you've heard me enough. The future is here. We're at the tipping point. And as systems engineers, I applaud you, I congratulate you, and my condolences, because it is very complicated, it is extremely complicated. As citizens within the state of Florida, as parents, what a great opportunity for us as individuals to be benefactors of this underway revolution, but with some anxiety. And as I started my conversation off, you get three choices. You can be oblivious. I don't think anybody's oblivious in here. You understand, you're engaged, you're listening, you're watching, you're part of it. So congratulations for that. Certainly don't be any less than a spectator, but absolutely be active participants in this revolution, and you will be benefacted in many ways, I would offer. And so on that note, again, as a Floridian, being here as a systems engineer, non-systems engineer, I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for listening and for your participation.
Vincent Alive like you, young man. So thank you very much for that exciting, stimulating presentation. is a small token from the Nkosi Orlando chapter. We'd like to present you with
Next
this
to
little
Nkosi, sir.
memento.
Excellent, thank you.
And,
Next to Nkosi.
There we go.
Oh, next to the
Nkosi sign.
there you go, hold on. Put it right in the limelight.
A small, since this is glass, a small story. So back when I was National Director for Counter Stealth Technology Policy Advanced Programs, we had a company here in Florida, we'll go unnamed, but they won, we would do an award every year, who the national awardee in the commercial sector company for stealth, and then there's counter stealth. And so down here in the state of Florida, there was an awardee for what they had done in the area of stealth. And so my team and I show up, a lot of things we do is unacknowledged. We show up, what doesn't show up? The award. So there's a picture of us. It's a stealth award. For this great big award, congratulations for, this is your stealth award.
Also, Grant, in honor of your lovely wife, Peg in the back there, here's a certificate to Best Buy, so you guys can go out and invest in some automation.
I'm gonna buy a drone.
Get a little drone.
Thanks a lot. Q&A. Well, I like to do this up front, so if you have to leave, you can leave gracefully, but don't interrupt as the Q&A is going on. No, I'm just kidding. Q&A time.
Yeah. So if
Yeah,
you
we have
questions,
Q&A
you
time. Also, if you haven't signed, again, it's a classified building facility we're in. In respect to the request from our host, we need to sign in because they need to know who's in the building.
Just take battery operated cars, okay? Now, they're allowed through every state. Are they working on the infrastructure for recharging them?
Good point. So one of the issues has been brought up in a number of forums it is believed by many analysts that we are at this threshold of transportation for autonomous vehicles, ground vehicles, the urban air mobility that we talked of. These predominantly are going to be electric, is what the view is, and certainly for the urban air mobility. What's lacking is the infrastructure. So again, it's not the technology. There's just not the infrastructure. You have a power grid to charge these things when they need to be charged. And when I spoke in Texas, for example, 2 weeks ago, I believe it was, I gave an example they have there in Houston, and that's one of the areas that's been targeted as an area for the urban air mobility. But if the vehicle is going to charge in 5 minutes, these vehicles, that's a huge surge of draw. And there just isn't, the power grid isn't in place. So you can bring the vehicles in, but then if it takes you 5 years or 10 years to get the grid in to support the vehicles, you just don't have the infrastructure. Yeah, so you're spot on. I would offer to this point too, I find the Tesla, the Model S, extremely attractive. They're very expensive. But to have the limited mileage, you only get 300 miles, for example, and then to have to stop and then charge, it doesn't charge in 2 or 3 minutes. It takes, depending on how you charge it.
48 minutes.
Yeah, but then that's a long coffee time, and then you have to be able to find stops.
I mean, if you're going from like here to Ohio, I mean, you're gonna have 3-4 charges.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, you're talking about your rest areas, instead of putting charging stations in or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yes,
but
ma'am.
conversely to that, they just highlighted that, what's the most expensive place in the United States for petrol, for an automobile?
California.
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 I was just there.
Not Alaska?
Yeah, it's like
Maybe.
twice the price anywhere else. So I said to Kathy,
It's $4.59 for regular.
$4.59.
Well, for
So I
regular.
said to Kathy, our son's probably laughing all the way to work in his Tesla from, what is it, Aliso Viejo to Irvine.
Mhm.
You know, no need for charging. They have chargers at work. He has a charger at home. So he's not paying $4.59 a gallon to commute.
Mhm.
Premium was fine.
Yes, ma'am.
So one of the things that I'm concerned with all these automated drone vehicles is, the privacy of our residencies. I don't necessarily want to buy a house and want to go outside and maybe, I like suntanning Lincoln. I don't want drones going over the top of me while I'm doing that. And if this is going to be something that's really commercial, and that might not be, you might have grandchildren and you just don't want to expose them to all this stuff. Where is this traffic just going to go overhead above our traffic systems?
Good question. So there's been a number of workshops over the past decade to include the FAA, Department of Transportation, industry in general. And two categories. One is the package delivery drone. So this is UPS, it's Amazon to deliver the packages. And from a safety perspective, it's agreed that for package delivery, there should be regular corridors where these drones are allowed to do their heavy flying, heavy lifting, pun intended. So it would probably be if you had transmission lines. You know, they would just go along the transmission lines. They're not going to be flying over homes. They're not going to be flying over residential areas. And then once they get to the designated area, that will be pre-approved with the FAA and with the communities of where the drones can then branch out to go deliver a particular package at your home, for example. And so that's for the drones for package delivery. For the urban air mobility, the conversation is underway, but it's different. And so the conversation is these are really no different than helicopters, as an example. And therefore there's no limitation on where the helicopter can fly. And then why would you put in a restriction on an urban air mobility? And that's as mature as that conversation. There's more details, but that's kind of where that is. It's sort of a stalemate. It's like a manned aircraft, but it's not. And you're not putting restrictions on the helicopters. So we can understand for the drone delivery and why you want to do that and have the corridors, but we can't see putting these urban air mobilities in very restricted corridors.
Is there any sort of conversation that would include, well, we don't have that many helicopters that fly overhead, so I might only have it happen maybe once every 10 days, versus once now we have more of these out there, it's going to be a regular occurrence, and maybe we need to revisit that
No, good point.
legislation.
And this will be part of the evolution. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
No, I was just gonna say the privacy issue is what you were talking about.
Yes.
Mhm.
And people looking in your windows and the whole thing.
Right.
And there's gonna have to be restrictions on that, and it's complex.
It's so strange because we own a house, we don't really own the land underneath it or the sky above it, but this is our space and we don't want to be bothered. You know, it's a
Correct.
privacy thing. But drones like that don't have to have video. Maybe we can say, turn off video, use GPS or cellular or whatever other signal to get you to the location, and then maybe at that point snap a picture that you dropped something off.
Yeah. On the topic of drones and privacy, and that's been a huge issue for the past decade, and even here in the state of Florida. First legislation, drone legislation in the state of Florida, and the statement I made earlier, the FAA is responsible for the airspace in the United States. And in fact, there's, in the legislation, it says, the FAA at the national level, states and other entities, districts, counties, cannot make aviation airspace rules and regulations. We, big FAA, we're responsible for all the air. And what happened in the 2011, 12, 13, I mentioned DJI, they started selling these drones. And then there were other industry entities that were making their own drones and started flying the drones, and the FAA was in a conundrum. Now, I started meeting with the FAA in the late 1990s, informing them that we, the Department of Defense, were fielding all these drones. And the inventory of the Department of Defense drones, I'll give you a little bit more background. 1994, when then Commander Begley was brought in and I was told you're going to be in charge of drones, there were 33 drones in all the Department of Defense, 33. And they were called Pioneer drones. They'd been purchased from the Israelis. They were used for spotters for battleships. The Navy had battleships back then. And the Marines for spotting with their 155 millimeter or not caliber cannons. So they were spotters, 33. And that was all the Department of Defense had. And there were visionaries that said, well, couldn't you use drones for more stuff, And there was congressional plus-up money, and therefore Grant Begley gets dragged into it. And I'm a fighter guy with a white scarf, and I'm leading the development of the Super Tomcat and the F-22 and other stuff. And I get ordered to go run drones. So I had congressional plus-up money. There were 33 in inventory in 1994, had $200 million, went ahead and said, let's do some demonstrations, and we'll make a couple of drones, we'll call them Global Hawk. We'll make a couple, we didn't make them. Industry, Teledyne Ryan at the time was bought by Northrop Grumman. And we'll go make some others, and we'll call them Predator, and that was General Atomics. And so we just started making a handful of these things, said just give them to the users, let the users try them out. If they like it, they'll buy more. If they don't like it, then it was just a grand experiment, and we'll move on. Moore's Law's continuing, this is again, back then. So sensors are big, the vehicles are big. We went from 33 drones in 1994, and I was asked to put a roadmap together. Grant, where do you think we'll be in the Department of Defense in another 10 years by 2004? So I did a roadmap, and I said 2004, where the budget is right now, you'll probably have 150, 200 drones, and the budget will probably be about $300 million. Spot on, spot on. But what happened in 2004, we had this thing called 9/11 in 2001. So these drones, the 33 drones that were in inventory in 94, and then those few Global Hawks and the Predators and Shadows and the Hunters and those other drones, the Fire Scouts that we had purchased, and they just went in very few just in inventory. So 2004, 2005, global war on terrorism, the users start getting these things, and they go, oh man, you know what you can do with these? Genie was let out of the bottle. You can do a lot. So we went from 33, 1994, 167 in 2004, budget of $350 million. Of that 167, that there's still 33 drones that we had back in 1994. Go 10 more years, 2014, you heard me mention this before, went from 167 to over 12,000 drones. And in 2004, I was asked to do another roadmap, and he said, well, Grant, where do you think this is going to be in another 10 years, 2014? And so I said, well, you know, we doubled it from before, and we'll think that's about where it is. So I think we'll probably have a budget close to, you know, maybe $1 billion, and there may be somewhere around, you know, maybe 400 drones in inventory. Over 12,000, and the budget was $5.1 billion. And even though the number of drones in the Department of Defense inventory in 2014 exceeded the number of manned aircraft, budget-wise, 7% of the aviation budget is going toward drones. I just give you this as an example. If you reach a tipping point, you just really don't know where it's going to take you. And so that just accelerated. So now, here we are 5 years later. So how many drones are in the Department of Defense inventory, and what's their budget? Guess what? Department of Defense isn't telling us anymore. So that's not in the public domain. But I would offer it was more than it was 5 years ago, oh, by the way. Yeah. So I'm just giving you an example. You get these tipping points, and it just kind of runs away with itself. And I think this is where, in transportation and as a commercial, private use, and public use, we're going to reach a tipping point similar to that. It may be next year, it may be in 5 years, maybe in 10 years. I assert it's probably going to happen pretty soon. I think it's going to happen pretty soon. How long will we tolerate 40,000 fatalities a year for traffic accidents, and predominance of those are human error? I think that's going to be a big movement. How long do we go without 500,000 truck drivers? Can't last very long like that. So I think we're going to be driven economically and by passion and try to get the death rate down and try to get transportation better, more affordably, more reliably. That's what I propose. Yes,
Are you familiar with the Hyperloop?
Yeah.
So I think that's fascinating. I think it's revolutionary, and I'm really excited about the possibilities that should that go forward. Where do you see, like, based on your experience in industry, where would you see that there would be more adaptation going towards a Hyperloop sort of environment, or the drones for, you know, transporting people?
I love the Hyperloop. The Hyperloop is a huge infrastructure challenge. Autonomous vehicles is more of individual entities in the network. One of the things I touch on, and I think for all of us we can realize too, that as individual drivers, as we first got our driving license at 15 years of age or 16 years of age, and all of a sudden you've been set free, you go drive the car for the first time. Think as an individual, all the driving experiences you've had in your individual life. It's a learning experience. Every time you drive, it's a learning experience. And it's difficult for you to pass that learning experience off to a son, to a daughter, to a family member. Hey, guess what just happened? I was driving home from work and this happened. I never saw that before. And oh, by the way, just about had an accident. It just blew me away, but I was safe and everything's okay. That is individual learning. But in the machine learning and in artificial intelligence, into the 10 billion miles of simulation that Google's doing, all the machines, at least in that environment, whoever's environment it is, all those machines are running that at the same time. And that's how you can get from one accident in 60,000 miles to one accident in 6 million miles, because all the machines are learning the same thing at the same time. Watch out for the ball coming from the car. There's probably going to be a kid behind it. You know, watch out for, pick whatever it happens to be. And so those machines are learning that real time, and they're learning it real fast. And now back to the Hyperloop, that's a huge infrastructure challenge. And so I would love to have something like that, and I think that's going to be on the horizon. It's going to be a parallel in any case.
You know, I'm actually surprised by that 60,000 to 6 million. I mean, if I got my zeros right, that's only a 100x difference.
One accident in every 60,000 miles. It's not a fatality, it's one accident, 60,000 miles. So think about your own driving, and however many miles you drive.
With what you're talking about and sharing and knowledge incorporation almost real time immediately, that number should be getting a lot bigger, whereas the 60,000.
For the autonomous vehicles, it's
Yeah.
one accident every 6 million miles. 6 million
Yeah.
is where it is right now with the simulated and combined with the actual road miles. And it's going to continue getting better.
That's what I
assume.
think, yeah, it's gonna get.
But,
a lot
you know,
better.
the conversation, if you have blue screens, you have these, you know, operating systems,
Hacking.
there's anomalies. You have anomalies and.
Yeah, that's the biggest
That's a
concern,
big issue.
biggest concern.
Elon Musk is on this
Especially
plane,
if it's China.
Hyperloop, so
Yeah, yeah.
we're working on it.
Yeah. I avail myself, I don't want to feel stuck here, but I love your questions, and so I don't want anybody to feel as though to be held captive. Yes, ma'am.
This one's a little bit off the path, but if there is a comment by the executive branch that there is trust issues between us and China. And so if companies like Huawei are suspected of using network communications infrastructure for espionage and all these other things, why would we as a nation purchase all of these drones from China?
So we, the Department of Defense, are not buying drones from China. It's the
Okay.
public who's buying the small drones from DJI. I'm sure there's some familiarity with the concern that China is developing communications and circuitry that in fact have eavesdropping capability, and we, the United States, have been importing a lot of these things. And so we may have that eavesdropping or proliferated throughout the country. So that's one of the concerns as we do trade with China. I think what's fascinating, and it's a different topic, that from a STEM perspective, education, so your systems engineers, you come from an engineering background. So last year, 2018, all the STEM graduates in the United States, all the STEM graduates in the United States that were U.S. citizens, so let me put that caveat, all the STEM graduates did not equal the top 1% college graduates out of China in STEM. I'll say that one more time. All the STEM graduates in the United States did not equal the top 1% of STEM graduates in China. So from a technological perspective,
They're kicking our butt.
we're in trouble, maybe. Of the top 500 fastest operating computers in the world as of last month, China owned 270 of them. Last 3 months ago, we, the United States, took away from China the #1 spot of having the fastest operating computer, that China held that